Last 5 years I've been grieving my wife Rose. My son Nathaniel was all I had left. Or so I thought. Last Tuesday I was scrolling through my phone and I saw a picture. It was my son, in a tuxedo, kissing a woman in a white dress I'd never met. His caption read, "Finally with the family that always supported me." I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I just looked at the picture of my late wife on the wall, and I got angry. The next morning I called my lawyer and sold the $850,000 house he was living in. Before I continue this story, let me know what city you're watching from in the comments below. And please hit like and subscribe if you believe that respect for family is non-negotiable. My neighborhood is Crenshaw. It's loud, it's proud, and it's real. I've lived in Los Angeles for 45 years. I still go to the same coffee shop every morning, the one on the corner of my street that smells like burnt beans and sweet pastries. The owner, Marcus, he's a good kid. He nods at me when I walk in. "Morning, Zeke," I nod back. "Morning, son." They all call me Zeke. They see a 70-year-old man in a clean flannel shirt and worn work boots enjoying his retirement. They see me reading the paper or scrolling through pictures of community projects on my phone. They don't see the man who built a logistics empire from a single rusty van. They don't see the $15 million I hide behind this simple life. And that's exactly how I designed it. My wife, Rose, God rest her soul, she always said, "Wealth whispers Isaiah. It doesn't shout." I live by those words. I'm not some doddering old fool. I observe. I listen. And I was listening when my phone buzzed in my hand. It was just a notification. A friend of my son Nate had tagged him in a photo. I opened it. "Congrats, Nate and Brooke." My brow furrowed. Congrats on what Nate and I... We hadn't been close. Not really. Not since Rose died 5 years ago. He was busy. Always busy. He'd mentioned this girl, Brooke. "She's just a friend, Dad. It's getting serious." I hadn't even met her. I figured when the time was right, he'd bring her by the apartment for Sunday dinner, like we used to when Rose was alive. I tapped on Nate's profile, and my world stopped. The coffee in my hand went cold. It was a picture, a professional photograph. Nate was in a sharp black tuxedo. Beside him, a blonde woman in a flowing white wedding dress. They were kissing. But the picture wasn't the knife. The knife was the caption. I had to read it 3 times to make sure the words were real. "So grateful to finally be with the family that has always supported me in every decision. Thank you, Robert and Cynthia Davenport, for welcoming me as your own." Family that always supported me. The words echoed in my head, louder than the street traffic. Louder than the espresso machine hissing behind the counter. I suddenly remembered working a double shift at my first garage grease under my fingernails. My back screaming, sweat stinging my eyes just to pay for Nate's private middle school. I remembered Rose, my beautiful Rose, poring over accounting books at our kitchen table at 2 in the morning, her eyes red with exhaustion, refusing to stop until Nate's tuition for USC was secure. $200,000. We didn't just give him that. We bled for it. We sacrificed vacations, new cars, and quiet nights for 30 years. And now he was standing with these strangers, Robert and Cynthia Davenport, white, wealthy, smiling like they owned him. And maybe they did. I wasn't invited, I wasn't told. His father was erased, replaced by a family he'd known for maybe a year. I didn't call Nate, I didn't text, I didn't smash my phone on the pavement, I just finished my coffee, paid my bill, left a $5 tip for Marcus like always. And I walked home. The silence in my apartment was deafening. This is the apartment Rose and I moved into in 1980. It's simple. 2 bedrooms. The furniture is old, but it's ours. It still smells a little like her lotion. Nate hated this place. "Dad, it's embarrassing," he'd said the last time he was here. "It's old. The neighborhood, it's not safe. Why don't you move? Get some sterile white-walled condo in Santa Monica near me." He didn't understand. He never understood. This apartment, this is my anchor. This is my promise to Rose. This is home. I sat in the armchair Rose loved, the one with the worn fabric on the arms. I looked at her picture on the mantel. She was smiling, her eyes bright. "He did it, Rose," I whispered to the empty room. "He threw us away." I picked up my phone again. I wasn't just grieving now. I was investigating. I scrolled through Brooke's profile. Public, of course. The engagement party 6 months ago. I wasn't invited. The bridal shower. Rose would have loved to be there. The weekend trip to Napa with the Davenports. I wasn't told. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate, calculated campaign to erase me, to cut me out of his new, shiny white life. And then I remembered the last time I spoke to Nate, 2 weeks ago, the phone call that ended in him shouting, "Dad, I need $20,000. For what, son? It's an investment opportunity, a sure thing. Brooke's father is helping me." I'm 70 years old. I didn't build my wealth by believing in sure things. I told him no. I told him, "Nathaniel, you are 35 years old. You have a good job. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet. Your mother and I gave you the foundation. Now you build the house." He didn't just get upset. He got cold. His voice changed. "You just don't get it, Dad. You're too stuck in the past. You're too cheap. You never support my decisions." He hung up on me. I sat there in the dark, staring at my wife's picture. And I understood. That caption on Instagram, that wasn't a celebration. It was a transaction. He had found new sponsors. He had found a family that would give him $20,000, and in exchange, all he had to do was give them my son. I sat in that worn armchair all night. I didn't move. I just watched the streetlights outside my Crenshaw apartment change, watching the dark purple sky turn to a hazy gray dawn. The shock didn't go away. The hurt didn't fade. It just changed. It settled. It cooled down from a roaring fire into a solid cold block of ice in my chest. My son had made his choice. He was 35 years old and he had made his choice. He had drawn his line in the sand. He thought I was just Zeke, a simple old man in a 2-bedroom apartment living off a meager pension and memories. He forgot who I was. He forgot what his mother and I had built. He forgot who he was dealing with. By the time the first rays of sunlight hit the framed photo of Rose on my mantel, the sadness was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard, quiet resolve. It was time to remind him. I didn't call him. I didn't text him demanding an explanation. Yelling was weakness. Crying wouldn't honor my wife. Action. That's the only thing that matters. I walked over to my old wooden desk. I opened my laptop. It's an older model, a simple black square. Nate always laughed at it. "Dad, just let me buy you a new one." He never understood I don't need fancy things. I just need things that work. And this one worked just fine. My fingers didn't shake. I typed in the address. Los Angeles County Public Records Portal. The website is clunky slow. But I know it well. I've used it dozens of times over the decades for my investments. I went to the registry. I typed in his name, Nathaniel Johnson. I clicked search. And there it was, official. Filed 3 days ago, marriage certificate, Nathaniel Johnson, and Brooke Davenport. So it was real. It wasn't just some costume party. It wasn't a joke. He had legally officially bound himself to this new family. He had legally officially erased ours. I closed the window. My breath was steady. I opened the property assessor's database. I knew the address to the house Nate lived in. I knew it by heart. A beautiful 3-bedroom Spanish-style home in Ladera Heights, a quiet street, a nice yard with a lemon tree, valued, according to the last estimate, at $850,000. Nate had been living there for 5 years. Ever since Rose passed. He told his friends he bought it. I knew he did. I'd heard him on the phone. "Yeah, man, just closed on a place in Ladera, an investment." I let him have that lie. I thought it made him feel like a man. I typed in the address. The parcel number came up. I clicked on the property details. The screen loaded. Owner, the Johnson Family Trust. My son's name was not on that deed. My son's name was not on the title. My son did not own that house. He didn't co-own it. He didn't have a stake in it. He was a guest. I went into my secure digital vault. I opened the file. The Johnson Family Trust. Final. Executed. I read the words my lawyer Gideon had drafted. The words Rose and I had gone over again and again in that hospital room. "You see, my son Nate. He thinks I'm just Zeke, the old mechanic who ran a small garage. He never asked about the logistics consulting I did on the side. He never asked why his $200,000 tuition at USC was paid in full up front every semester. He never asked how his simple old dad living in this small apartment somehow bought him a brand new BMW as a graduation present. He never asked. Because he didn't really want to know. He just wanted the checks to clear. Rose and I, we weren't just mechanics. We started a small logistics firm out of that garage. We were the silent partners in two major freight forwarding operations out of the port of LA. We invested every single dime we made, quietly, smartly. Rose was the brain. She saw the numbers, she saw the future, and when she knew she was sick, when she knew she was leaving me, she made me promise. "Don't just give it to him, Isaiah," she whispered. Her hand was so frail in mine. "Don't let this money make him weak. Make him respect it. Make him respect us." So after she died, I created the Johnson Family Trust. I am the sole trustee, the administrator. Nate is the beneficiary. I bought that house in Ladera Heights with cash. I put it in the trust. I gave Nate the keys, and I told him one thing. I looked him right in his eyes. "This is your home, son. It's a gift. From me, and from your mother's legacy. You can live here rent-free for as long as you want, under one condition." He was so excited grabbing the keys, he barely listened. Yeah, anything, Dad. Thank you. You honor the family that gave this to you," I told him. "You respect the sacrifices your mother made. You respect our name." I looked back at the Instagram post on my phone, grateful for the family that always supported me. He hadn't just violated the condition. He had spit on it. He had spit on Rose's grave. I closed the laptop. The sun was up. It was 7 a.m. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Nate. I picked up my phone. The clock on the wall read 7 a.m. Exactly. My fingers were steady. I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. A deep professional voice answered. "Powell. Gideon. It's Zeke." "Zeke, it's early for you. Everything all right?" Gideon Powell has been my lawyer for 30 years. He's more than that. He's my confidant. He's the only man on earth who knows the difference between Zeke, the old man from Crenshaw, and Isaiah Johnson, the retired founder of JZ Logistics. He's the only one who saw the statements. He knows about the 15 million. He knows about the offshore accounts. He was there when Rose was sick. He was the one who sat with me at my kitchen table, tears in his own eyes as we structured her will. He's the one who drafted the papers for the Johnson Family Trust. He knew the terms. He knew the clause. He knew the why behind it. He was the executor of Rose's promise. "I need you to do something for me, Gideon," I said. My voice was quiet. "Of course, Isaiah. What's going on?" "I want you to sell the house in Ladera Heights, the one Nathaniel is living in." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, so long I thought he might have hung up. "Zeke," he finally said. And his voice was no longer the voice of my lawyer. It was the voice of my friend. "What happened?" "You can't be serious. That's Nate's home. You gave him that home." "No," I corrected him. The ice in my chest was in my voice now. "I gave him a place to live. I gave him a privilege. He violated the terms of the trust." "Violated the terms? What terms?" "The respect clause, Isaiah. That's a moral clause. It's legally gray." "He got married, Gideon." He got married, Zeke. That's wonderful. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because he didn't tell me," I said. The line went silent again. He didn't tell me. He didn't invite me. I found out on Instagram. He was standing there with his new wife and her parents, rich white folks. He thanked them. I took a breath. He thanked them, Gideon. He wrote, "For the family that always supported me." He spit on his mother's grave, Gideon. He dishonored Rose. Gideon didn't need any more explanation. He knew what Rose meant to me. He knew what she had sacrificed. His voice became cold, professional, back to business. "The trust is clear," Gideon said. "As sole trustee, you have full discretion to liquidate any asset if the beneficiary fails to uphold the honor and legacy of the Johnson family. This is a clear breach." "I want it done," I said. "Zeke, this is your son. Are you absolutely certain you want to pull this trigger? Once it's done, it's done." I looked at the picture of Rose on my mantle, her bright, beautiful smile. "Find me a cash buyer," I ordered. "A corporation, an investment firm, I don't care who. I don't want the highest price. I want the fastest close. I want it sold by tomorrow." "Tomorrow, Isaiah, that's impossible. We have to." "I want speed, Gideon, not price. I want a check in my hand and my son out of my house. Make it happen." I hung up the phone. I looked at Rose's picture. Okay, baby, I whispered. That's done. I didn't have to wait long. I was sitting in my kitchen drinking a simple glass of water, just staring at the wall. The morning sun was bright, but my apartment felt cool. I was calm. That's the thing they never understood about me. I don't get loud. I get quiet. I get focused. My phone buzzed on the counter at exactly 12:05 p.m. I looked down. The screen read, Nate. I let it buzz. Once. Twice. A third time. I took a slow sip of water. Then I picked it up. Hello, Nathaniel. Dad. His voice was a scream. It was high-pitched cracking with a panic I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, and he dented my old truck. Dad, what is going on? What did you do? I kept my voice perfectly level, perfectly calm. I don't know what you're talking about, son. You sound upset. Is everything all right with your new family? Don't play dumb with me, he roared. A man with a clipboard was just here. He just walked through my house taking pictures. Oh, I said as if I were hearing this for the first time. A man with a clipboard, that sounds serious. He said he was an appraiser. He said the property was being listed for an immediate cash sale. He said a law firm sent him Gideon Powell's firm. What the hell did you do, Dad? I let the silence hang for a moment. I let him stew in that panic. I let him feel that foundation he thought was so solid, that shiny new life he'd built, start to crack right under his feet. I'm selling the house, Nathaniel. I said it as simply as if I were saying, I'm making coffee. The phone went dead quiet. I could just hear him breathing fast and shallow. What? He whispered. I'm selling it, I repeated. No! He exploded. The volume was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear for a second. No, you're not. You cannot sell that house. It's already in motion, I said. That's my house, he screamed. You gave me that house. It's mine. It's where I live with my wife. You can't just take it. That's illegal. I almost laughed. Illegal. This from the son who had just performed the deepest, most profound act of betrayal. You seem to be confused, son, I said, and my voice was cold now. The ice from my chest was finally traveling up. Let me be very, very clear. So clear that even your new supportive family can understand it. I never gave you that house. Your name is not on the deed. Your name is not on the title. I gave you the privilege of living in that house. I paid the property taxes. I paid the insurance. I paid for the new roof last year. You paid nothing. That house, Nathaniel, belongs to the Johnson Family Trust. A trust your mother and I built. A trust I control. And you just violated the terms. He was sputtering now. Terms? What terms? What are you talking about? There are no... This is just because I asked for that $20,000. This is you being cheap and vindictive. You're trying to ruin my marriage. Ruin your marriage, I said. That's interesting. I didn't even know you had a marriage until I saw it on the internet. Did you know that Nate, I found out my only son, got married on Instagram? The line went dead quiet again. Not a single sound. He was caught. He was trapped. There was no lie he could tell. There was no excuse he could make. I could picture him perfectly. Standing in the middle of that beautiful Spanish-style living room, a room I paid for, his face white with shock and rage, realizing for the first time in his 35 years that his actions had real, immediate, devastating consequences. This is not about money, son. I continued, my voice low. This is about respect. It's about loyalty. It's about honor. You stood in front of the world and you put a caption on a picture. The family that always supported me. You stood next to strangers and called them your family while throwing away the memory of the woman who died, making sure you had a future. You violated the clause, Nathaniel, the clause that says you must honor the legacy of this family, and the trust is clear on what happens next. The privilege is revoked. The asset will be liquidated. Still nothing from his end, just the faint sound of him breathing. He had nothing to say. He knew I was right. He knew he was wrong. And he knew for the first time that Zeke, his simple old dad, was not a man to be trifled with. I didn't wait for him to find his voice. I didn't wait for the fake apologies or the new wave of insults. I had said what I needed to say. I hung up the phone. I placed it back on the counter. I looked at the picture of Rose. I knew this was just the beginning, the first shot fired. He would fight back. He would bring his new family into it. I was counting on it. I knew that phone call wasn't the end. It was just the end of round one. My son is weak in character, but he's stubborn. He's a fighter when he's cornered. He wasn't going to just pack a bag and hand over the keys. He was going to fight back. He was going to bring in his new powerful family. He was going to try and paint me as the crazy, vindictive old man. I sat there waiting. I knew the next call wouldn't be from Nate. It would be from his lawyer, or more likely from Robert Davenport's lawyer. I was right about the next call, but it wasn't from Nate's team. It was from mine. My phone rang again an hour later. Gideon Powell. "Zeke," he said. His voice was all business. "I've done it. You were right about speed over price. You found a buyer." "Better," Gideon said. "I found a shark, a real estate development firm that wants the land in Ladera Heights. They've been trying to buy that whole block for a year. They'll pay $800,000, cash. They're willing to sign the papers this afternoon and close in 48 hours. This was good. Fast, clean. "Excellent," I said. "There's a problem, Zeke," Gideon cut in his voice low. "A big one. Nate is in the house. He's a tenant. Even though he pays no rent, he has rights. We can't just sell it out from under him. The new buyers won't close until the property is vacant. We'd have to serve him with a formal eviction notice." I felt my heart sink. Eviction. "How long does that take in L.A.?" I heard Gideon sigh. "With the courts backed up, best case scenario, 30 days. Worst case, he could drag this out for 3, maybe 6 months. 6 months. 6 months of him living in my house knowing he'd won. 6 months of him and that woman laughing at me. 6 months of disrespecting Rose's memory. "No," I said. The word was flat. Final. "That is not an option. We are not waiting 6 months." "Then what do we do, Zeke? We can't send the police to drag him out. He hasn't broken the law yet. He has a legal right to be there until a judge says otherwise." I was silent. I looked at the picture of Rose. She was smiling. She always knew what to do. She always saw the angle. "He thinks I'm a simple old man, Gideon. He thinks I'm poor, and he thinks I'm emotional. He's expecting me to fight. He's expecting me to yell." So, I said, a new plan forming in my mind. I won't. I'm going to give him exactly what he doesn't expect. I'm going to give him hope. "What are you talking about?" Gideon asked. "Call the buyers. Tell them to have the papers ready. I'll have the house vacant by tomorrow afternoon." "How?" "Just be ready," I said and hung up. I waited an hour. I let him sweat. I let him talk to his new wife. I let him call his new supportive father-in-law. I let them build their strategy. Then I called Nate. He picked up on the first ring. He didn't yell this time. His voice was cold rehearsed. "What?" I changed my voice. I made it sound old, tired, even a little shaky. "Nate. Son. I think I may have been too harsh." There was silence on his end. He was surprised. He was processing. "Dad," he said, cautious. "I'm an old man, Nathaniel. I'm alone here. I miss your mother. That house, it's the last real thing I have left of hers. When I heard you got married, I snapped. I wasn't thinking. This was the bait. I was playing the part he'd already cast me in, the lonely, senile old fool. "Dad, it's okay," he said slowly. He was starting to smell the blood in the water. He thought he had me. "I should have told you, I know. Brooke and I, it happened so fast. I don't want to fight, son," I said, putting a little quiver in my voice. "I don't want to sell the house if it means losing you too. You're all I have left." I heard him exhale, a sigh of relief, a sigh of victory. "Oh, Dad, thank God," he said, his voice suddenly warm and confident. He was back in control. "I knew you didn't mean it. Look, we can fix this. Brooke's parents, they understand. They want to help us." "Yes," I said. "Yes, I'd like to talk to everyone. Can you come to Gideon's office tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock. Gideon's office?" His suspicion returned instantly. I want him there," I said, sounding weak. "To make sure I do everything right. To reverse the sale. I don't understand these papers. I want you to bring Brooke and her parents. You said they were supportive. I want to apologize to them too for this misunderstanding. We can just talk as a family. He was convinced. I had given him everything he wanted, a senile old father he could manipulate, a chance to show off his powerful new in-laws, a stage to win his house back. Yeah, Dad? He said, his voice full of false sympathy. Yeah, of course. That's a great idea. We'll be there. 10 a.m. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll sort all this out. Thank you, son, I whispered. Thank you. I hung up the phone. The second my finger hit the end button, the quiver in my voice disappeared. The weakness in my spine vanished. I stood up straight. I picked up the phone again. I dialed Gideon. He picked up. Well, they're coming, I said. My voice was no longer Zeke the old man. It was Isaiah Johnson, the CEO. Nate, his wife, and her parents. 10 a.m. tomorrow. They think they're coming to bully a grieving old man into submission. Gideon was quiet for a beat. Oh, Zeke, you're a cold-blooded man. I learned from the best, Gideon. Now I want you to prepare the main conference room, the one with the long oak table that overlooks the city. I want the full display. You got it, Gideon said. What else? Bring the file. Which file? The trust. No, I said. Bring my file. Bring the Jay-Z logistics portfolio. Bring the investment summaries. Bring the offshore account statements. Bring the full unredacted $15 million truth. Zeke. They want to see who I am, Gideon. Fine. Tomorrow I'm going to show them. The next morning I did not wake up at dawn. I woke up at 6 a.m. I did not put on my flannel shirt. I did not put on my worn work boots. I walked to the back of my closet to a section I hadn't opened since Rose's funeral. I pushed aside my old jackets and found the garment bag. The zipper made a soft hissing sound as I pulled it down. Inside was a suit. Not just any suit. It was a custom-made Italian wool suit, charcoal gray. It cost $5,000. Rose had bought it for me 10 years ago for an awards dinner. You built an empire, Isaiah, she'd said. It's time you looked like the king you are. I never wore it. It felt like a costume. Today it felt like armor. I put it on. The fabric was light-fitting me perfectly. I put on a starched white shirt and a simple dark blue silk tie. Then I went to my dresser. Under my socks, I pulled out a wooden box. Inside, resting on black velvet, was my Patek Philippe, a gift from Rose on our 30th anniversary. It's not about the money, Isaiah, she'd told me, fastening it on my wrist. It's about time. It's to remind you that every second we have is precious. I hadn't worn it since she passed. I slipped it on. The weight of it on my wrist was comforting. It was solid. It was real. I looked in the mirror. The man looking back wasn't Zeke from the coffee shop. He wasn't the simple old man from Crenshaw. He was Isaiah Johnson, chairman of Jay-Z Logistics, retired, and he was going to war. I didn't walk to my old pickup truck. I used my phone to open an app. A black Lincoln sedan was at my curb in 3 minutes, my private car service. The driver got out and opened the door for me. Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Good morning, Charles. The drive from Crenshaw to Century City is only about 20 minutes, but it's a journey between two different worlds. We left the low-lying buildings, the vibrant murals, and the noise of my neighborhood. We merged onto the 10 freeway, and soon we were surrounded by glass and steel. We pulled up to a 40-story tower that reflected the blue morning sky. The driver opened my door. Will you need a return, sir? No, Charles, I said, adjusting my tie. I'll be taking my own son home today. I walked into the lobby, marble floors, a security desk where they already had my name. Mr. Johnson, 50th floor, sir, Mr. Powell's office. The elevator was silent fast. It opened onto a plush carpet, quiet as a tomb. The receptionist, a sharp young woman, looked up and her professional smile widened. Mr. Johnson, it's so good to see you. Mr. Powell is waiting for you in the main conference room. Thank you, Maria. I walked down the hall. I could hear them before I saw them. Faint, nervous, angry voices. Nate. A woman. A man. I pushed open the heavy oak doors, and everything stopped. They were already there. Nate. His new wife, Brooke. And the supportive family, Robert and Cynthia Davenport. They were standing in the middle of Gideon's main conference room, and they looked completely lost. The room was designed to intimidate. It was on the corner of the 50th floor, Two walls were pure glass looking down on all of Los Angeles. The table was a single massive piece of polished black oak that could seat 30 people. They had clearly been waiting for me, but they hadn't been waiting for me. Nate saw me first. His mouth literally fell open. He looked at my suit, then my watch, then my face, then back to the suit. His brain couldn't put the pieces together. Dad? Brooke, the new wife, just stared. Her eyes were wide. She was taking in the room, the view, the expensive art on the walls. I could see the tiny calculator in her head spinning, trying to figure out how this connected to the man she'd seen in the old apartment. But my focus was on Robert and Cynthia. They were different. Unlike Nate and Brooke, who were just confused, the Davenports looked uncomfortable. They knew what this room meant. They knew what my suit meant. This was their world. This was the language of money and power, and I was speaking it fluently. They had walked in expecting to meet a poor, simple old man from the hood, a problem to be managed. But they had walked into the lion's den, and they suddenly realized they weren't the lions. Robert Davenport, a man who was clearly used to being the most important person in any room, stiffened. He adjusted his own expensive, but not this expensive suit jacket. He had lost his advantage before I even said a word. Cynthia, his wife, gave me a tight, forced smile. The look of disdain she had been preparing for me was gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp, nervous curiosity. Nate finally found his voice. "Dad, what is this? Why are you dressed like that?" Before I could answer, Robert Davenport stepped forward. He put his hand out, trying to take control of the meeting. He was trying to reestablish the hierarchy he had in his head. "Zeke," he said. His voice was loud, a little too forceful. He was trying to put me back in my place. "I'm Robert Davenport. This is my wife, Cynthia. I'm glad we could finally meet, though the circumstances are unfortunate." I didn't take his hand. I just looked at him. He cleared his throat, pulling his hand back awkwardly. "Now look," he said. "I think there's been a major misunderstanding here. Nate and Brooke are newly married. They're just starting their lives. This business with the house, it's petty, Zeke. It's very, very petty." He gestured around the room as if to dismiss it. "Clearly you're doing better than you let on. Good for you. But that's no reason to take it out on the kids." He was trying to frame me as the villain, the rich old man suddenly showing up to bully his poor son. "We are here to resolve this," Robert continued, his voice full of false authority. "The children need that house. It's their home. We are not leaving this office until you agree to stop this ridiculous sale and sign the deed over to them properly. We can even discuss compensation for your trouble." He was trying to buy me. He was trying to buy my own house from me, to give to my son. The arrogance was breathtaking. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought he had the power. He thought he was dealing with Zeke. He had no idea who I was. "Bo," Nate started. "Mr. Davenport is right. We—" A new voice cut through the room, clear, sharp, and cold as steel. "Please sit down." Gideon Powell walked in from his private office holding a thick, leather-bound folder. He didn't look at the Davenports. He didn't look at Nate or Brooke. He walked over to me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said, "Isaiah, I'm glad you're here." Then he turned to the others who were still standing confused. He pointed to the chairs at the far end of the table. "Sit down." They sat. Robert Davenport annoyed. Cynthia, his wife, looking around the room as if trying to appraise the art on the walls. Nate and Brooke sat as far from me as possible, looking like children called to the principal's office. Robert put his hands on the table, a big, fleshy, confident gesture. "Look," he said, ignoring Gideon completely and speaking directly to me. "Zeke, I'm going to call you Zeke. I want to be plain. We're all busy people. I run a $50 million import business. I don't have time for theatrics." He waved his hand at Gideon as if shooing a fly. "I don't know who this associate of yours is, but this is a family matter, and it's simple. You gave your son a house, a gift. You were proud of him. We get it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a tone of false man-to-man conspiracy. "Now maybe you're feeling, I don't know, intimidated. You see him marrying into our family, you see the life he's going to have. Maybe you feel like you're losing him. And so you throw a tantrum. You threaten to take his home. It's petty, Zeke. It's a bad look." Nate shifted in his chair, looking at the table. "Dad, Mr. Davenport, Robert held up a hand, silencing my son. No, Nate. Let me handle this. Your father is emotional. It's understandable. He looked back at me. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to call off this ridiculous sale. You're going to sign the deed over to Nathaniel and Brooke as you should have in the first place. A proper wedding gift. We can even compensate you for your trouble. Make this all go away. Don't make this ugly. Don't make us get our lawyers involved. He sat back, crossing his arms. He had delivered his terms. He thought the meeting was over. He thought he had won. Gideon Powell let the silence stretch. He let Robert's arrogance hang in the air, suffocating the room. Then Gideon smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a surgeon about to make the first precise cut. Mr. Davenport, Gideon said, his voice smooth and cold, your grasp of California property law is simple. Gideon leaned forward and placed the thick leather-bound binder on the table. The sound wasn't loud, but it was heavy. A thud that made everyone at the table flinch. This, Gideon said, tapping the cover with one finger, is the Johnson Family Trust. Executed 5 years ago following the passing of Mr. Johnson's beloved wife, Rose Johnson. He opened the binder. The pages were thick official. Let me be perfectly clear, he said, so that no one, especially not your lawyers, has any confusion. The property at 124 Ladera Heights is not, nor has it ever been, the personal property of Mr. Nathaniel Johnson. Nate looked up, his face pale. What? Gideon ignored him, his eyes locked on Robert. The house is an asset wholly owned by the trust. Mr. Isaiah Johnson, he said, gesturing to me, is the sole and uncontested trustee of that trust. Mr. Nathaniel Johnson, Gideon continued, is listed as a beneficiary. Specifically, he was granted the residential privilege of that asset. In terms you might understand, Mr. Davenport, he was a guest, a long-term non-paying tenant in a home that did not belong to him. Robert started to speak. This is a technicality. It's semantics. A court will see. Gideon held up a single sharp finger. I am not finished. He turned a page. A yellow tab was clearly visible. This privilege, Mr. Davenport, was not unconditional. It was bound by specific covenants within the trust document. I believe you'll be interested in Article 4, Section B. Allow me to read it. Gideon's voice was clear, like a judge reading a verdict. The aforementioned residential privilege is entirely contingent upon the beneficiary, Nathaniel Johnson, actively upholding and demonstrating respect for the legacy, honor, and memory of the Johnson family, specifically the sacrifices of the settlers Isaiah Johnson and the late Rose Johnson. Gideon looked up from the page, his cold eyes scanning the four of them. A moral clause, as you called it, Mr. Davenport. A tantrum. In this document, it is a legally binding covenant, and as the sole trustee, Mr. Johnson has complete, total, and non-negotiable discretion to determine if and when that clause has been breached. Gideon reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it down the long black table. It stopped directly in front of Robert. It was a high-quality color printout of Nate's Instagram post. A public declaration, Gideon said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, thanking his new family as the only one that has ever supported him. All while living rent-free in an $850,000 home paid for in cash by the very family he is publicly insulting. Gideon leaned back in his chair. I believe that constitutes a breach, Mr. Davenport. Don't you? Robert Davenport stared at the printed-out Instagram post as if it were a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. His arrogant, dismissive expression had vanished. He was a businessman, and he had just been presented with a contract he didn't read and a breach he couldn't deny. Cynthia, his wife, was pale. Brooke, my new daughter-in-law, looked like she was going to be sick. But it was Nate who finally broke the silence. He let out a shaky, desperate laugh. A respect clause. Are you kidding me? That's not a real thing. That's ridiculous. You can't just kick me out of my home because of a caption. He was looking at Gideon, pleading. He was still trying to find a loophole. I had been silent the entire time. I let my lawyer handle the law. Now it was my turn to handle the family. Slowly, I reached into the pocket of my $5,000 suit. I pulled out my phone. It wasn't the old flip phone I sometimes used back in Crenshaw. It was a new, sleek, top-of-the-line smartphone. I tapped the screen once, unlocking it. The bright light of the display illuminated my face. I placed the phone flat on the polished black table. With one finger I slid it. It glided across the smooth wood silent until it stopped directly in front of Nathaniel. On the screen was his Instagram post. The photo of him, his new wife, and his new supportive family. And right below it the caption. Every word clear as day. My voice was low, quiet, but it filled that entire 50-story conference room. Read it, Nathaniel. He stared at the screen. He wouldn't look at me. Dad. Read it, I commanded. My voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. I want to hear the words you wrote. Read them out loud for your new family to hear. His face was slick with sweat. His hands were trembling. He looked at Robert. He looked at Brooke. They offered him nothing. He looked back at the phone. He whispered, "Grateful. To finally be with the family that always supported me." "I didn't hear you," I said, leaning forward. Louder. "Grateful to finally be with the family that always supported me." He snapped, his voice cracking with a mix of shame and anger. I leaned back. There it is. I looked at my son, my only son. Is that respect, Nathaniel? Is that honor? Tell me what that is. It's just Instagram, Dad, he pleaded, his voice getting high. It's just words. It doesn't mean anything. I was just trying to be nice to Brooke's parents. So you were lying, I said. Which is it, son? Are you a liar to them, or are you a liar to me? Because you can't be both. You thought I wouldn't see it. I continued, my voice cold. You thought your simple old dad from Crenshaw wouldn't know what Instagram was. You thought you could have it all. You thought you could live in my house. A house your mother's memory paid for. And at the same time, publicly in front of God and everyone, erase her. Erase me. I turned my gaze to Robert Davenport. He flinched. You're a businessman, Robert. You understand terms. You understand contracts. You heard him. He wrote it. He admits he wrote it. The covenant has been breached. The privilege is revoked. Nate stood up so fast his chair almost fell over. You're doing this. You're doing all this performance. Just because I asked you for $20,000, you're a spiteful, cheap old man. He had said it. The last-ditch effort of a child who'd been caught. The insult. So that's what this is about, I said, nodding slowly. The $20,000, the money I wouldn't give you. Yes, he shouted, emboldened. You sit here in this fancy office in that stupid suit, pretending, and you couldn't even help your own son. He pointed at the Davenports. They supported me. They believe in my ideas. Did they? I said. It wasn't a question. I looked at him, my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who was now a stranger. You're right about one thing, Nate. This is about support. I stood up. So, let's talk about it. Let's talk about support. Robert was speechless. His entire strategy, built on bluster and intimidation, had crumbled against a single piece of paper. He just stared at the Instagram post. Nate was a ghost white and trembling. It was Cynthia, the mother-in-law, who finally moved. She had been silent, observing me, calculating. Now she decided to intervene. She saw her husband had failed, so she would take over. She let out a sigh, a high theatrical sound of exasperation, as if she were a queen dealing with a difficult peasant. All right, she said, her voice dripping with fake syrupy patience. That's quite enough. We've all seen the performance. She reached into her expensive leather handbag and pulled out a slim gold-plated checkbook. She placed it on the black oak table. The small click of the pen was the only sound in the room. Clearly, she said, this isn't about family, it's about money. You're upset. You feel you're owed something. We understand. These things happen. She was talking to me like I was a child, like I was a waiter she was about to tip for good service. So let's just cut through all this emotional nonsense, shall we? She looked at me, her eyes cold and transactional. How much do you want? For the house? For your hurt feelings? What's the number that makes this all go away? I just stared at her. I said nothing. She took my silence as a negotiating tactic. Let's be reasonable, she continued, her voice patronizing. The house is in a decent area, but it's old. It needs work. My husband, we are prepared to offer you a very generous price. just to settle this. For the children. She clicked her pen open. $700,000. We can have our bank wire it to you this afternoon. She paused, looking at me, expecting me to gasp to jump at the offer. No. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Fine. She tapped her pen. 750. That's my final offer. That is more than fair, and frankly, it's more than you'll get on the open market. We write the check, you sign the house over to Nate and Brooke, and this entire embarrassing episode is over. We can all go back to being a family. She smiled a tight, victorious little smile. She had just laid her king on the table. She thought she had just bought me my house and my silence. She truly believed that the most powerful thing in that room was her checkbook. I looked at her. I looked at the gold pin. I looked at her husband, Robert, who was nodding as if this was his generous idea. I looked at Nate, who was actually looking hopeful, thinking, yes, please, take the money. Dad, just make this stop. And then I started to laugh. It wasn't a chuckle. It wasn't a small, polite sound. It started deep in my chest. A low, rumbling sound that I hadn't let out in years. It grew louder. It was a full, rich, deep-throated laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a man who has just heard the most absurd, most ridiculous, most profoundly stupid thing in his entire 70 years of life. I laughed. I laughed at their arrogance. I laughed at their ignorance. I laughed at the sheer, stunning blindness of their wealth. My laugh echoed off the glass walls 50 stories above the city. It filled the entire conference room. Gideon Powell. My lawyer smiled. Not a big smile. Just a small, sharp twitch at the corner of his mouth. He knew what was coming next. Cynthia's perfect poised smile dissolved. Her face went from confident to confused to angry. What is so funny? I'm trying to be reasonable. Nate looked terrified. Dad, stop. Stop laughing, please. Robert frowned. I don't see what's amusing, Zeke. We made you a serious offer. I finally wiped a tear from the corner of my eye. I took a deep breath, my laughter fading into a cold, sharp smile. A serious offer, I repeated, my voice shaking with amusement. $750,000. I shook my head, still smiling. Madam, I said, looking right into Cynthia's confused, angry eyes. You don't have enough money in that checkbook to buy my lunch. Cynthia's face turned an ugly shade of red. How dare you? We are trying to help you. We are trying to be civil, and you sit there and insult us. Insult you? I asked. Madam, I haven't even begun. Gideon, I said, turning to my lawyer. Gideon nodded. He knew his cue. Mr. Davenport, Mrs. Davenport. He began, his voice taking on a formal, almost bored tone. It appears my client and I have made a grave error. We've been operating under the assumption that we were all peers here, but your generous $750,000 offer has made it clear that you are confused about Mr. Johnson's financial standing. Robert scoffed. Confused, I see a man in a fancy suit in a fancy office. He's clearly not poor, but he's not in my league. I know what I'm doing, son. Do you? Gideon replied, his voice soft. He reached into his leather briefcase. He didn't pull out a single sheet of paper. He pulled out a thick, spiral-bound report. It was an official financial portfolio summary. He slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of Robert. It seems you and indeed your son-in-law have been operating under a significant information deficit, Gideon said. Mr. Johnson has graciously allowed me to correct that for you. Robert looked down at the cover. It read Isaiah Johnson, Personal Assets Portfolio, Confidential. He opened it. I watched him. I watched his eyes scan the first page. I saw the exact moment, the exact second the arrogance drained from his face. His eyes widened. His thick, meaty hands, which had been drumming confidently on the table, suddenly went still. He read the first line, then his eyes jumped to the bottom line. The big number. He didn't say anything. He just made a small sound, a little grunt, like he'd been punched in the gut. What is it, dear? Cynthia asked, annoyed. Robert, what does it say? Robert didn't answer. He just mechanically passed the binder to his wife. Cynthia looked at it. Her reaction was better. She gasped. A sharp, loud intake of breath. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. Her diamond ring sparkled under the conference room lights. She looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. "This is a lie," she whispered. Her voice was thin, shaky. "This is a joke. It's impossible." Brooke, my new daughter-in-law, leaned over. "What, Mom? What is it, Nate?" My son just sat there frozen, looking at everyone. He knew something terrible had just happened, but he didn't know what. "Gideon," I said calmly, "perhaps you should read the summary for them. Their eyesight might be failing." Gideon stood up. He clasped his hands behind his back. He looked at them like a professor addressing a room of slow children. "Mr. Isaiah Zeke Johnson," he announced, "is the retired founder and sole proprietor of JZ Logistics, a privately held freight and logistics corporation." He paused for effect. "As of the close of business yesterday, Mr. Johnson's personal net worth, combining his liquid assets, his offshore investment accounts, and his extensive commercial and residential real estate portfolio, is valued at $15,427,000. Silence. Absolute, profound, deafening silence. You could have heard a pin drop on the 50-story high plush carpet. Robert Davenport looked like he had turned to stone. His face was pale. The man who ran a $50 million import business, which I knew from my own research was actually a $5 million business heavily leveraged, was staring at a man worth 3 times his actual value. Cynthia was clutching her pearls. Literally, her hand was at her throat and her eyes were just blank. The world she knew, the hierarchy she lived by, had just been completely inverted. Brooke. She just stared at me. Her mouth was open. She looked at my $5,000 suit. She looked at my Patek Philippe watch. She looked at my simple, worn gold wedding band, and all the pieces clicked into place in her head. The poor old father-in-law was a lie. The whole thing was a lie. But my eyes were on my son, Nate. He looked like he had seen a ghost. He wasn't just pale. He was gray. He was shaking his head, a tiny, jerky movement. No, Dad, that's not true. You live in Crenshaw. You drive that old truck. I live in Crenshaw, I said, my voice cutting through his denial. Because I choose to. I drive that truck because it was the last truck your mother and I bought together. I live simply Nathaniel because, unlike them, I gestured to the Davenports, I have nothing to prove. My value isn't in what I wear or what I drive or the house I live in. My value is in what I built. I stood up. I walked slowly to the glass wall, looking down at the city. My city. You said they supported you. I said, my back to them. I turned around, and I looked right at Nate. You have no idea what support is. I turned away from the window, away from the view of the city I had helped build, and I looked at them. 4 people, trapped. Not by the locked doors, but by the truth that was finally filling the room. You, I said, my voice quiet, landing on Cynthia Davenport. You are the family that always supported him. I let the words hang in the air. Robert and Cynthia shifted uncomfortable. They knew they were in a trap, but they didn't know the size of it. You think support is writing a check for a house you thought I couldn't afford? I asked. You think support is a caption on an Instagram post? You think it's a fancy dinner where you get to show off? My voice was soft, but it cut through the silence in that 50-story tower. Let me tell you what support really looks like. Support isn't a celebratory toast after the work is done. Support is the work. I looked down at my hands. They're clean now, soft, the hands of a retired man. But I can still feel the grease under the nails from 40 years ago. I can still feel the calluses. Support, I said, looking right at Robert, is your wife, my Rose, sitting at our small kitchen table at 3 o'clock in the morning, crying because the numbers for the payroll don't add up, but she keeps working anyway. Support is missing your own anniversary because a shipment is stuck at the port of Long Beach, and if it doesn't move, your son's tuition check is going to bounce. Support isn't a generous offer of $700,000, Mr. Davenport. Support is sacrifice. It's blood, it's sweat, it's time, it's 45 years of your life poured into someone else praying, just praying they grow up to be a good man. I turned my full attention to my son. He was shaking. And you, Nathaniel, you took all that. You took 45 years of our lives, you wrapped it all up, and you handed it to them. You gave them the credit. You gave strangers the credit for the life your mother died building for you. Cynthia started to speak, her voice thin. Now I really don't think... I raised my voice just enough to stop her. I am not finished. You sat here and you wanted to talk about money. You wanted to talk about who supported who. Fine. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the numbers. I walked from the window. I didn't stop until I was standing right behind Nate's chair. He was pinned between me and the long black table. He couldn't look up. He just stared at his hands. You're 35 years old, Nathaniel. Let's review the support you seem to have so easily forgotten. Gideon, my lawyer, knew what I was doing. He slid a single sheet of paper from the portfolio. It was a summary. I didn't even need to look at it. I knew the numbers by heart. They were burned into my memory. Let's start with your education. The University of Southern California. A very fine school, very expensive. I looked at Robert and Cynthia. Their faces were blank expectant. Did he tell you he got a scholarship? Did he tell you he worked his way through waiting tables? I looked back down at the top of Nate's head. Tell them, son. Tell them how you paid for that 4-year degree. Nate sank lower in his chair. His face was pale. You paid, Dad. I paid. I repeated, my voice like a hammer. Your mother and I. $212,000. In cash. So you could graduate without a single penny of debt. That was support. I didn't stop. I wasn't going to let him breathe. What about 3 years ago? You remember 3 years ago, Nate, when you called me at midnight, you maxed out a few credit cards, you were in a jam. Do you remember the amount? He just shook his head, looking at the table. I remember, I said. $32,640. You were drowning in debt you'd built up trying to impress people. You called me crying. You swore you had learned your lesson. Who paid that bill, Nathaniel? You did, he whispered. I did. In one single wire transfer, I wiped your slate clean. I gave you a fresh start. That was support. And the car. The car you drove here today. The shiny black BMW. The one you tell your friends you got a great lease on. Did you forget who bought that car, Nathaniel? Who paid $54,000 in cash for it as a graduation gift so you wouldn't have a car payment? I pointed a finger at the back of his head. I did. Your mother and I did. We drove that same 10-year-old pickup truck so you could drive a luxury car. I leaned down, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper right by his ear. I have supported every weak, bad, impulsive, and ungrateful decision you have ever made. I have been your invisible safety net your entire life, and you didn't just forget, son. You erased it. You erased us. I let my words hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket over my son. Nate was broken. He just stared at the table, his face a mask of shame and disbelief. Robert and Cynthia Davenport were statues, their faces pale, their minds clearly spinning, trying to process this new reality. But I wasn't finished. There was one person who hadn't spoken. One person who had been sitting there watching, thinking this was all about Nate's failure, not hers. I slowly turned my head. My eyes found Brooke. She was sitting there stiff, her hands clutching her designer purse in her lap. She was watching me with a look of pure, unadulterated fear. She was smart enough to know that a man like me doesn't stop halfway. And you, Brooke, I said. My voice was soft again. She flinched as if I had shouted. Me? I don't know what you're talking about. I barely know you. Oh, I think you do, I said. You know you sat there all morning so quiet, letting your parents and your new husband fight this battle. You thought you were safe. You thought you were the prize. But let's talk about your support system, shall we? I walked slowly around the table until I was standing opposite her. Let's talk about last year, before you and Nate even got engaged. You were trying to start a business, wasn't that right? A little online jewelry company. Brooks Baubles or something. Charming. Her eyes widened. How did you know about that? How did I know? I smiled. Brooke, the day my son told me your name, the day he said he was serious about you. I had my team run a full financial and personal background check. It's called due diligence. I didn't build a $15 million company by being simple. I saw Nate look up, his face a new shade of pale. You investigated her. Of course I did, I said, not taking my eyes off Brooke. I investigate everyone who comes near my family. And what I found, it was very, very interesting. You weren't an entrepreneur, Brooke. You were a disaster. You had $24,800 in high-interest credit card debt across 6 different cards. You had 2 maxed-out store cards. You were 2 months behind on your car payment. You were, to put it plainly, drowning. Cynthia and Robert Davenport looked at their daughter in horror. "Brooke, is this true?" Robert stammered. Brooke was shaking her head. "No, he's lying." "Am I?" I said. Gideon, without even looking up from his notepad, said, "Chase Sapphire balance 6,200. Amex Gold balance 9,100. Capital One balance 4,000. "Stop!" Brooke shrieked. "Stop it." "Yes," I said. "Let's stop. Because then a miracle happened, didn't it, Brooke? Just when you were about to default, just when your little house of cards was about to collapse, money appeared." I leaned closer. $25,000. It just showed up in your checking account. "Do you remember?" She was completely white. "You told Nate it was a startup grant for young female entrepreneurs. You told your parents it was a performance bonus from a job you didn't have. You lied to everyone." I looked at her. "You ever wonder where that money really came from?" She just stared her mouth open. "It came from me," I said. The room exploded. Nate stood up. "Dad, what?" Robert just said, "My God." "I sent it," I said, my voice cold and clear. "Through a third-party legal fund Gideon set up. An anonymous grant. I wanted to see what you would do, Brooke. I was testing you." "You tested me?" she whispered. "Yes. I hoped you were a good person. I hoped you were just someone who'd had bad luck. I hoped you would take that $25,000, a gift a second chance, and pay off your debts. I hoped you would be honest with my son. I hoped you would come to him and say, 'Nate, someone just saved me. Let's build a life honestly.'" I shook my head. "But you didn't do that, did you? You paid the minimum balance on your cards, just enough to stop the calls, and you spent the rest. You spent $5,000 on a new website that never launched. You spent $10,000 on a business trip to Cabo. And the rest you spent on new clothes and fancy dinners to continue the lie, to make my son think you were, what? His equal. You weren't his equal. You were a parasite, and I had just paid your entry fee. You didn't see it as a second chance," I said, my voice dropping. "You saw it as a down payment. You saw my son, his good nature, his trust, which I now see as just weakness, as your way out. You saw me as a simple old man to be managed, a problem to be handled, a house to be taken." I let that sink in. The full devastating truth. I hadn't just supported my son. I had supported her. The entire relationship was a fraud funded by me. I turned finally back to my son. He had sunk into his chair, his head in his hands. He was a completely broken man. "And you," I said, my voice rising for the first time, the anger finally coming to the surface. "You stand there, in my house, after I paid her debts, after I paid your debts, after I paid for your entire life, from your education to your car to the very roof over your head. You have the audacity," I was so angry I had to pause, "you have the audacity to stand in front of the world and post on the internet that they," I jabbed a finger at the stunned Davenports, "these people who you just met, these people who just watched you humiliate your father, they are the only family that ever supported you." I let the question echo off the glass walls. "All of it, Nate. All our history. Your mother's entire life's work. You threw it in her face. You threw it in my face. Why?" I leaned down close to him. "Because I finally said no. Because I wouldn't give you another $20,000 to set on fire." My words hit him, harder than a slap. All the fight, all the arrogance, all the false confidence just evaporated. My son, my 35-year-old son, just crumpled. He didn't just look down. He put his head in his hands. His shoulders started to shake. I heard him make a sound, a choked, gasping sob. "Dad," he whispered. It was the voice he used when he was 10 years old and had broken my favorite tool, scared, small. "Dad, I'm sorry. He looked up and his face was a mess of tears and snot. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know about any of it. The money, her debts, any of it. Brooke tried to grab his arm. Nate, stop. Don't beg him. He shook her off. I didn't know, he shouted at me. I just wanted to impress them. Can't you see that? He pointed at the Davenports, who were watching him with cold reptilian eyes. I just wanted them to respect me. The way they respect you. They have everything, Dad. And I have nothing. I'm just your son, living in your house. I just wanted something for myself, he cried. When you said no to the 20,000, it felt like you were saying no to me, like you didn't believe in me. And they said yes. They said I was smart. They said I had potential. I watched him cry. I felt nothing. Just an empty, cold space where my fatherly pity should have been. The well was dry. Impress them, I repeated. My voice was flat. So you did know. You knew that caption was a lie. You knew it was a betrayal. You knew it would hurt me. No, I mean, I don't know what I meant. I was just happy. You were trading, I said, my voice cutting through his sobs. Stop lying to yourself, Nathaniel. You were trading up. You saw their shiny life and you decided you wanted it. And the price for entry was me. The price was your mother's memory. I leaned down close to his tear-stained face. Don't you dare tell me you wanted to impress them. You didn't want their respect. You wanted their money, just like you've always wanted mine. You just found someone you thought was an easier mark. You didn't prove you were smart, son. You didn't prove you had potential. I looked at him, my heart hard as granite. You just proved that your loyalty, love, your entire family history can be bought, and the price is apparently $20,000. I turned away from my son. I was done talking to him. I looked at Gideon. He nodded. Robert Davenport, seeing the absolute destruction of my son, saw an opening. He tried to take back control. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. All right, he said, his voice shaky but trying to sound firm. This has been a deeply regrettable family airing of laundry. Clearly there are issues here. Clearly. But, he said, trying to force a smile, it changes nothing. The fact remains. Isaiah, Zeke, you're rich. We get it. Congratulations. But you can't evict your own son. A judge will laugh you out of court. This breach of trust nonsense won't hold. It's an emotional argument, not a legal one. So let's all calm down. Let's be adults. He was trying to call my bluff. He thought I hadn't actually done anything yet. He thought I was just threatening to sell the house. I just looked at Gideon. I gave him a small, simple nod. It was his turn. Gideon smiled that cold, surgical smile again. An emotional argument, Gideon repeated as if tasting the words. You think after 30 years of representing Mr. Johnson, I would bring him into a 50-story high-rise for an emotional argument? Mr. Davenport, you seem to believe this is a negotiation. You seem to think you've been invited here to discuss terms. Gideon reached into his briefcase. He pulled out a new folder, a different one, thin, blue. This was never a discussion, Gideon said. This was a notification. He slid the folder across the table. It stopped in front of Nate. What is this? Nate whispered, his hands shaking as he reached for it. That, Gideon said, is a copy of the finalized, executed, and filed sales agreement for the property at 124 Ladera Heights. Nate just stared at it. Cynthia leaned in. What does it say? It says sold, Nate murmured in total shock. Sold for $800,000. To be precise, Gideon interjected, sold this morning at 8:15 a.m. to the Ladera Real Estate Development Group, a cash purchase. The funds are already in escrow. The title has been transferred. It was Brooke who understood first. It was Brooke who screamed. It was a raw, ugly sound. Sold. What do you mean sold? You can't. We live there, our stuff is there, our wedding gifts. I would suggest you start packing, Gideon replied, checking his watch. The new owners are eager to take possession. Robert Davenport slammed his fist on the table. You're bluffing. You can't close a sale that fast, not in California. It takes 30 days. This is a scare tactic. It's not, Gideon said, when the property is owned by a trust, is unencumbered by debt, and is sold to a pre-vetted corporate cash buyer who has already done their due diligence. It takes about, 90 minutes, which is exactly how long it took me this morning. The room fell apart. 48 hours. Brooke was hyperventilating now, the mask of the sophisticated wife completely gone. You're kicking us out. In 48 hours. Where are we supposed to go? She turned on Nate, her face twisted. This is your fault. You said he was a simple old man. You said he was nothing. I didn't know, Nate cried out. Where are we going to live? She shrieked, grabbing the front of his shirt. Robert and Cynthia were just staring, stunned, defeated. They had come here to absorb my son into their family, and now he was homeless. He was a liability. He was worth nothing to them. I stood up. I buttoned the jacket of my $5,000 suit. I adjusted the Patek Philippe on my wrist, the gift from Rose. Brooke was still screaming at Nate. We have nowhere to go. We have no money. Your father is a monster. I walked slowly, deliberately toward the door. Zeke, Robert Davenport called out. His voice was no longer arrogant. It was desperate. Isaiah, wait. We can fix this. Don't be this way. I paused at the door. I looked back at the four of them, a perfect picture of chaos. Brooke was sobbing. Nate was paralyzed. Cynthia was trying to comfort her daughter, looking at me with pure hatred. And Robert just looked like a man who had lost. Where are we supposed to go? Brooke cried out at me again, her voice a desperate plea. I looked at her. I don't know, I said, my voice calm and clear. But I'm sure the family that always supported you will have a spare room. I turned around. I opened the heavy oak door. And I walked out, leaving them behind in the ruins of the life they thought they had stolen. Nate was still in his chair, paralyzed, just staring at the blue folder. Robert and Cynthia were on their feet, their faces a mask of disbelief and fury. But it was Brooke who found her voice, and it was a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a question, it was a shriek, a raw, high-pitched animal sound of pure, unfiltered panic. Where are we supposed to go? Her perfectly styled hair was coming loose as she shook her head. Her expensive makeup was starting to streak as tears of rage, not sadness, welled in her eyes. In 48 hours, where do we go? What do we do? She wasn't looking at me. She wasn't looking at her parents. She was looking at Nate. Her eyes were wide, filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. You! She screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my son. This is your fault you did this. Nate looked up, his face ashen, confused. Me, Dad, you... She lunged at him, grabbing the front of his expensive shirt. You told me he was nothing. You told me he was a simple, broke old man from Crenshaw. You said he was just baggage. Robert Davenport finally spoke, his voice a low growl. Brooke, stop it. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene, she shrieked, laughing a wild, hysterical laugh. Our life is over. He's a monster. He's been lying to us. He's been lying to me. She let go of Nate and turned to me, her face twisted. You planned this. You sat there in your little apartment, letting us talk, you let me think you were nothing. This was a test, wasn't it? That money, that $25,000, it was a trap. It was a gift, Brooke, I said calmly. You're the one who turned it into a trap. We have nowhere to go, she sobbed, collapsing into a chair. We have no money. We're ruined. He's ruined us. Cynthia Davenport, for the first time, looked at her daughter with something other than pride. She looked at her with contempt. Get up, Brooke, she snapped. Don't be pathetic. Robert looked at me. His face was no longer pale. It was a deep, dangerous red. This is unconscionable. This is cruel. You're a cruel, vindictive man, Isaiah. And this isn't over. We will fight you. We will see you in court. Gideon spoke, still seated. On what grounds, Mr. Davenport? The trust is ironclad. The sale is final. Your daughter-in-law's public humiliation of her benefactor, which I'm told happened in front of dozens of witnesses, is more than enough to satisfy the breach of honor covenant. You have no case. Robert looked at Gideon, then at me. He knew it was true. He had lost. Where are we going to go? Brooke wailed again, her voice muffled by her hands. We have nothing. I stood at the door. I had buttoned my jacket. I had adjusted my watch. I was ready to leave. I looked at the four of them. This new family. Robert furious at being outplayed. Cynthia disgusted by the mess. Nate a broken, empty shell of a man. And Brooke sobbing over the loss of a life she never even earned. She looked up at me one last time, her eyes desperate. Please, she whispered. Please don't do this. We have nowhere to go. I paused. I let her last desperate plea hang in the air. I looked at her. I looked at my son. I looked at her new, supportive parents, and I gave her my final answer. "I don't know, Brooke," I said. My voice was calm. It was clear. "But I am sure the family that always supported you will have a spare room." I turned around. I opened the heavy oak door, and I walked out, leaving them behind in the ruins of the life they thought they had stolen. Gideon held the door open for me. I stepped out of the conference room and into the quiet, carpeted hallway. I didn't look back. The heavy oak door swung shut behind us, the click of the latch sounding like a vault ceiling. For a single second, there was silence. And then the screaming began. It wasn't just yelling, it was a raw, primal explosion of rage and panic. Even through the thick, soundproofed wood, I could hear her. "Brooke." "You..." Her voice was a shriek, high and thin. "You told me he was nothing. You told me he was a poor old man. You did this to me. You ruined my life." I heard Nate's voice, broken, pleading. "I didn't know. How could I know?" Then Robert Davenport's voice, a deep, furious roar. "Be quiet, both of you. You've made us look like fools. You brought this disaster to our family." There was a crash, something heavy hitting a wall, probably a chair. Gideon and I walked calmly toward the elevator. We didn't run. We didn't look hurried. "Well," Gideon said, pressing the down button, "that went precisely as expected." "Yes," I said. "It did." The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside the quiet, wood-paneled car. As the doors slid shut, the last sound I heard was Cynthia Davenport's voice, colder than all the others, cutting through her daughter's sobs. "Robert, call our lawyer, now, and get her out of my sight. I can't even look at her." The doors closed, and I was surrounded by silence. I didn't hear from Nate for 3 weeks. I didn't expect to. What could he say? I went back to my life. I went to the coffee shop. I watered the plants Rose and I had planted on the balcony. I read my books. I handled my business from my old laptop. The sale of the house in Ladera Heights closed in 48 hours, just as Gideon had promised. The $800,000 was wired into the trust's account. It was a clean, simple transaction. I heard whispers, of course. My network is quiet, but it's deep. I heard from a real estate contact that Robert Davenport had put a deposit on a small one-bedroom apartment in Palms. Not for him, of course. For Nate and Brooke. A far cry from Ladera Heights. I heard the lease was only for 6 months. A clear message that their support had an expiration date. Then I heard from an old colleague at a shipping firm. "Isaiah," he said over the phone, "you won't believe this. Your son Nate, he was let go from his position at Sterling Imports." "Oh," I said, feigning surprise. "That's a shame. He loved that job. He was good at it." "That's the strange part," my colleague said. "He wasn't good at it. Not really. He was lazy. He missed quotas. But his boss, a guy named Frank Davison, always protected him, kept him on. Frank always said Nate had good people behind him." I knew Frank. I'd known him for 30 years. I'd been the one to call him 5 years ago. "Frank," I'd said, "my son Nate is looking for a sales job. He needs to find his own way, but maybe you could keep an eye on him, make sure he lands on his feet." I had been his invisible support all along. "So what happened?" I asked my colleague, already knowing the answer. "Frank retired 2 weeks ago," he said. "The new VP looked at Nate's numbers, saw he wasn't pulling his weight, and cut him loose. Just like that. The kid's good people must have forgotten about him." I hung up the phone. I looked at the picture of Rose. No, I thought. His good people hadn't forgotten. They had just finally let go. He was on his own now. No house, no trust fund, no job, no invisible safety net. He was 35 years old. And for the first time in his entire life, Nathaniel Johnson was finally truly standing on his own 2 feet. I wondered how long it would take before he fell. It was 3 months later. The heat of summer had settled over Los Angeles. I was back in my chair at the coffee shop on Crenshaw. My chair, the one by the window. The world was just as it had been. Marcus, the owner, was wiping down the counter. The espresso machine was hissing. The old men in the corner were arguing about basketball. Everything was the same. I was the same. I was sipping my black coffee, reading the business section when the bell over the door chimed. I didn't look up. Not until a shadow fell over my table. I lowered my newspaper. It was Nathaniel. I hadn't seen him since that day in Gideon's office. I hadn't spoken to him. I had heard the whispers. I knew he'd lost the job. I knew he and Brooke were living in that small apartment, and that the Davenports were treating them like hired help. I knew they were struggling. He looked terrible. He was thin. The expensive, arrogant flesh had melted off him. He wasn't wearing a slick suit. He was wearing a simple blue button-down shirt wrinkled and a pair of cheap slacks. He had dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired. He looked 40. But his eyes were different. The arrogance was gone. The anger was gone. All I saw was a deep, hollow exhaustion. He just stood there, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. He didn't know if he was allowed to sit. I folded my newspaper. I set it on the table. "Hello, Nathaniel." My voice was quiet. Not angry, not happy, just a fact. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. "Can I sit down?" I nodded at the empty chair across from me. He pulled it out slowly and sat down. He looked like a man who was afraid any sudden movement would break him. Marcus, the owner, looked over, saw the tension, and started to walk over. I just gave him a small shake of my head. He stopped and went back to his counter. Nate just sat there staring at the table. He looked at my hands folded on top of the newspaper. "I went to the house," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not my house, son. It's owned by a corporation now." "I know," he said quickly. "I know. I went by. To look at it. There's a big fence around it. They're tearing it down. To build one of those big, ugly box mansions." I didn't say anything. That was the price of a cash sale to a developer. "I stood there," he continued, his voice cracking, "and I watched the bulldozer knock down the lemon tree, the one Mom planted." He finally looked up at me. His eyes were red. I remembered her teaching me how to make lemonade from it. I must have been 6, 7. She always let me put in the sugar. She always told me it was my secret recipe. He took a shaky breath. "I haven't thought about that in 20 years, Dad." I just nodded. "It was a good tree. I'm sorry," he whispered. I waited. I knew what was coming. The apology for the money, the apology for the house, the plea. But that's not what he said. "I went to Gideon's office," he said. "Last week, I asked him to see the trust." My heart, that cold, hard rock in my chest, gave a single painful thump. "He said he couldn't," Nate said. "He said you had dissolved it, that all the assets were being moved to a new foundation, a foundation in Mom's name, the Rose Johnson Foundation." "That's right," I said, "to help young black entrepreneurs in South LA, something your mother and I always planned to do." Nate's face crumpled. He wasn't just crying now. He was weeping. He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. He let me read one thing, though. He sobbed into his hands. The letter Mom wrote, the one attached to the trust. My breath caught. I had forgotten about that letter. Rose had written it in the hospital. A single page in her beautiful flowing handwriting to be given to Nate when I was gone. "I read it, Dad," he said, looking up, his face destroyed. "She said the money wasn't the gift. She said I was the gift. She said, 'Nathaniel, your father and I, we built this for you. Not so you could be rich, but so you could be free. Free to be a good man, free to be a good husband, free to be a good father. Don't waste it. Just make us proud.'" He broke down completely. "I'm so sorry, Dad." He wasn't apologizing for the house. He wasn't apologizing for the money. He was apologizing for her, for Rose, for the legacy. He finally understood. I let him cry for a long time. I just watched him, the man who was my son. Finally, his sobs quieted. He wiped his face with a cheap paper napkin. He looked at me. "I lost everything. Brooke, she left me. She went back to her parents. They blame me for all of it. The job, the house, everything. I'm living in a studio apartment in Palms, the same one I had before. Before I gave you the house," I finished for him. "Yes," he whispered. "I'm working a sales job. It's just a job. I'm starting over. From nothing." He looked at me with those old, familiar, pleading eyes, the eyes that had gotten him everything he ever wanted. Can I ever come back, Dad?" I looked at my son, the stranger who sat across from me. I thought about Rose. I thought about her sacrifice. I thought about her hope. I picked up my newspaper. I folded it neat and precise. I placed it back on the table. I took a final sip of my coffee. It was cold. I stood up. Nate looked up at me, his face full of a desperate childish hope. I looked down at him, not with anger, not with love, just with clarity. "An apology is a start, Nathaniel," I said. My voice was firm but not cruel. "But respect is something you have to earn, all over again, from the beginning." I put a few dollars on the table for my coffee. I looked at him one last time. "You know where to find me." I turned, I put on my hat, and I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him there, alone, at the table. The sun was bright outside. It was a new day. And for the first time in 35 years, my son was finally on his own. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. True wealth is not measured in dollars, but in dignity, loyalty, and the respect we show for the sacrifices made by those who came before us. Greed, and the arrogant belief that kindness is weakness, is a debt that always gets collected. When we dishonor our family's legacy, we don't just lose an inheritance. We lose our foundation, our history, and ultimately ourselves. In the end, what we earn with integrity is the only thing we truly get to keep. What would you have done if you were in Isaiah's place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.